In this video, I'm going to walk you through frequency tables and frequency distributions. I'll be using the example from our book. If you're in the 16th edition, I will be starting on page 19. So here we have the Applewood Auto Group. We have some information here, and this is data they've collected from the previous month. And each line of data represents the sale of a car. And so we have how old the car is, how much profit was made on the car, which location where it was the vehicle was sold from, and then what type of vehicle, and then how many previous purchases that buyer has made. So this is the data we're going to use, and we talked a little bit last week about qualitative and quantitative data. There are two types of data in here that are qualitative, and that's location and vehicle type. When we ask the question, which location was the vehicle purchased at, the answer is non-numeric, right? We would say Tionesta or Sheffield, and so on. Now, age and profit and previous purchases are quantitative in nature because we answer with a number. So a frequency table is off of qualitative data, and it's put into mutually exclusive classes, and it's also collectively exhaustive. And just to define that a little bit, mutually exclusive means that it can only go to one of the classes. It can't fall into more than one of them, and that'll make more sense here in just a second. And collectively exhaustive means that every vehicle that was sold fits into one of those classes. There's no outliers. It doesn't sit somewhere outside of what we're looking at. So everything is included. So to create a frequency table just means we're going to basically summarize this. So the first question is, how many vehicles were sold at each location? So how many were sold at Tionesta, how many were sold at Sheffield and Caen, and so on. Now there are several different ways that you can go about doing this. We can sort column C and count them up. The fastest way, actually, and one of the ways that I love, is by using pivot tables. If you haven't used a pivot table before, this is a great learning opportunity. So I'm going to go ahead and highlight my column C, and I'm going to insert a pivot table. So it's shown me the section that I've highlighted. I've highlighted column C, and then it's going to give me a new worksheet, and that's fine. And so I'm going to just click on there. Now there's a whole bunch of things on our screen that you probably haven't seen before, and that's okay. And location is the only variable, remember, that we clicked on. We could have clicked on all 5, but we're just dealing with location. I'm going to drag location, clicking and dragging location down to rows. And over here now you'll see it's given me all of the different rows that are there. Oh, and sorry, there's a blank field there. We probably should have just highlighted the actual raw data instead of the whole column. And then I'm going to click on location again, and I'm going to move it down here under values. And what it's going to do then is it's going to count, and it tells me that right here. It says count of location. And so we can see that from our data that was here, 52 vehicles were sold at Caen, 40 were sold at Olean, 45 at Sheffield, and 43 at Tionesta, which is a total of 180 vehicles for the last month. Now this right here is a frequency table. It's really easy to look at. It's easy to read. We can create a bar chart off of it. If we wanted to create a bar chart, we can highlight these two fields, and we're going to go just to insert, and under the charts area I'm going to click on bar chart, and you can pick whichever one you like. And here we can see a nice pretty bar chart. I'm just going to get rid of that because we don't need it, and should have gotten rid of this blank column, but that's alright. So here we can see Caen, Olean, Sheffield, and Tionesta. Now maybe you wanted to see specifically like how many were sold just on the bar chart itself. We can do that by going to, let's see, want here? Oh, probably quick layout right here. So I'm under the design tab. This will come up if you have the chart selected. If I unselect the table and I click somewhere over here, you'll notice those tabs go away at the top. So if I click on the chart, then I get these 3 extra tabs. So I'm going to check quick layout, and no, that's not going to do what I want. I'm sorry. We should be able to add data labels right there, and so then that tells us on top what we have. So it's just a nice visual that we can show people. So this is a frequency table, and this is what we do for the qualitative data. Now what we're going to do is we're going to switch and go over, oh no, there's one more thing I want to do. I want to show you relative frequency also. So I'm going to move this over to the side. What we have in this column right now, we have a count of location. This is also called the frequency. This is how often something happens in that class. These are considered classes or categories. Okay, and 52 is the frequency for Cain. 40 is the frequency for Olene, and so on. Now we also have this term called relative frequency. I'll type in relative frequency. And all the relative frequency is the percent of the whole. It's basically what you would see in a pie chart, right? A pie chart shows us the whole piece and breaks each of the different ones into its sections based on the percentage. So in order to find the percentage, we are going to take, and we go equals. For Cain, we're going to take 52, and then we're going to divide that, and sorry that's weird, it's because it's the pivot table. And then we're going to divide that by 180. And if I hit enter, then I get 0.288, which would be the same as 0.2, or it would be the same as 28.89% if we were to round. Okay, we're going to go ahead and leave it in decimal form. In terms of the relative frequency column, we're going to leave it in decimal form. You always will. Now, if we go up here, there's this thing called dragging that we can do, and that's where I can drag my formula down. So I could click on this and drag it down. But there's one problem I'm going to have with what I just did, and that's that everything isn't dividing by 180. In fact, it's just copying that down. Oh, shoot. And that's probably because of the pivot table. So let me move this really quick. I'm going to just highlight that and come down here and see. Yeah, okay, so that gave me the actual just raw values. So I'm going to come down here outside the pivot table. Alright, so here we have frequency, and here we're going to do relative frequency. And to get our total, you can use the auto sum button over here. So these are just kind of quick hotkeys. You can do sum, average, count, max, min. So I'm just going to do auto sum. It's showed me right here what it's going to sum. It's got it highlighted, and we get our 180. Okay, so this was our total. So my relative frequency is 52 divided by 180. Now, I want to divide 40 by 180, 45 by 180, and 43 by 180. Now, because of that, I want to lock that 180 cell because it's not going to move. The rest of them are going to move as I go down, but 180 is going to stay the same. So to lock a cell, you need to put dollar signs, in this case around B and 16. There is a hotkey for this. If you hit F4, it will automatically put dollar signs in front of the B and the 16, the row and the column. Okay, so I'm going to hit enter. I get my 28%, 29%. I'm going to drag this down, and then I get my percentages for each one. Now if I add this column up, it should equal 100% or 1. Okay, so the relative frequency is just the percent, and when you add up that column, it should always equal 1. So for all of these, we did 52 divided by 180. Here we did 40 divided by 180, 45, and so on. Okay, so that is what relative frequency is. Now let's go ahead and skip over to when we're dealing with quantitative data. So right here, quantitative data would be age, profit, and and previous number of owners. We're going to deal specifically with profit, and I'm going to go ahead and copy this column. I can do that by hitting Control C, or you could right click and hit copy. I like the hotkeys, so I'm going to do Control C, and then I'm going to come over to sheet 2, and I've already done it actually, but I would click right here and hit Control V for Victor, and that will paste it into that column. Now we're going to do basically the same thing that we did with qualitative data, except that we have to choose our classes and be more particular about them, because now we're dealing with numbers, we're not just counting. So there's several things that we have to know in order to construct a frequency distribution. The first thing we have to decide is how many classes we want to have. Over here in the qualitative data that we had 1, 2, 3, 4 classes. With quantitative data, we have to decide how many classes do we want and how big should those classes be. So we have some equations that I've put up here that help us kind of get a basic idea of what we want. They don't have to be as specific as you might think. So first of all, we need to know some variables. And the first variable we have is n. N is our sample size, which is basically how many vehicles did we sell. And we actually already know that from over here. We had 180 vehicles sold. We can go over here and we can scroll down and we can see that we have 181 cells with data in it, and we know that the first cell was a title, so we have 180 vehicles. So N is 180. We now need to know K, and K is how many classes we have. So in the previous example we had 4. We need to decide how many. Here's the formula that we're going to use to approximate how many classes we should have. 2 to the K has to be bigger than N. So for instance, if I take 2 to the 4, I get 16. I'm going to put 4 over here. If I take 2 to the 5, I get 32. These are both much smaller than 180, which is what we're comparing it to. We're comparing it to N. So let's go up a little bit more, and let's go to, let's say, 8. So I'm going to say 2 to the 8, and I get 256. Well, 256 is definitely bigger than 180, but let me make sure I didn't need to go smaller than that. So I'm going to take 2 to the 7th, and I get 128. Okay, so 128 is less than 180, so we need to go with 8 classes. That's why we're making that choice, because 256 is bigger than 180. So K is going to equal 8. So we're going to have 8 classes, and now we need to decide how big should our classes be. Well, the very smallest they can be is our biggest number minus our smallest number. And I'm going to go ahead and just sort this column really quick from smallest to largest. So sort and filter over here. I've highlighted column A, and I'm going to click on sort smallest to largest. And now I go from 294 all the way up to 3,292. So I have my biggest and my smallest values. This is also, like, the difference between those two is the range, right? It's how big of a space we have here. So I'm going to go ahead and put my max and min, my minimum value and my maximum value. And I can calculate these. I can see them right now, but if you needed to calculate them, you can use maximum right here. And we're actually going to highlight this whole column and hit enter. If you want to know what I just did right there, I clicked on the first value, and then I held down Control and Shift, and then I clicked the down arrow key, and that highlighted my whole string of data. You can do that going down, left and right, whatever, but hold down Control Shift and then the down arrow key. So my maximum value was 3,292, and my minimum value is sitting right there, I realize, is 294. Okay, so there's a quick way to know your min and max. Now to figure out I, which is my class interval, how big should my class be? Okay, it should be, my numerator is my max minus the min, which is the range, and I'm going to divide it by how many classes I want. So that should make sense. We have our range, and we're going to break it up into 8 parts. And what we find is we get a number of 374. Now, we can use 374, but it's not really a very good idea. You should really use a number bigger than 374, and you should use something that makes sense, right? We like tens and fives and hundreds. So use something that makes sense, that's easy to read, because the whole point of doing a frequency table and frequency distribution is so that it's really easy to understand the data that you're looking at, and so it's a nice visual. So we're going to go ahead and use 400, partially because that's what the book uses, but it's also just a really nice round number that's easy to use. Okay, so the next step in creating a frequency distribution is we need to know what number should we start with. What number should we start with? And then we'll go up by 400s each time, and we'll make sure that all of our data is included. So we're going to go ahead, it has to be smaller than our smallest number, obviously, because we need everything to be included. And we're going to go ahead and start with 200. I'm going to create this over here. So here are my classes, and we're going to start at 200. We're then going to go up by 400 at a time. So we go up to, and then 400. Now there's a reason I'm being really particular about how I wrote this, and that I'm using several different columns to do it. This up to is not a dash. And what that means is that if I did this, 200 to 400, the number 200 would be included in this class, and the number 400 would be included in this class. If I say up to, the number 200 is in this class, but 400 is not. But 399.99999 is. And that's the biggest difference. Okay? So because we're dealing with profit and money that go decimal points that go forever, we're going to do 200 up to 400, but 400 is not included. So my next class down here is going to be 400 up to 600. No, I'm sorry. I did that wrong. This is supposed to be 600. I went up by 200. So our interval is 400, so we go 200 up to 600. So sorry about that. So we've got 600, and then we go up to 1,000. Now what's nice is once you have created some kind of pattern in Excel, you can drag, which is great. So let's see if this works. I can highlight this whole area, and then I can go down one cell, and I can see, in fact, it did go up by 400 for me. So I need 8 classes that look like this. I currently have 3, so 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8 classes. Okay, so 200 up to 600. My last class is 3,000 up to 3,400. So the next step is to make sure, first of all, that all of your data points are included in the table you've just created. So our smallest number was 294, and that fits in the first class. And our largest number was 3,200, almost 3,300, and that fits in our last class. So we know that every data point is going to fit in one of our classes. I'm going to go ahead and center that so we can see that these are our classes. Okay. The next step in this is to figure out the frequency. And the frequency is just counting up how many go into each class. So for 200 up to 600, we'll just do this as quick as we can. I'm going to highlight anything that's 200 up to 600, which actually stops right there. Now in the very bottom down here, usually in Excel, it gives you your average, count, and sum. You can change what values they give you there they're sitting all right here. These are your choices for what you want sitting in that bottom bar. So it's really handy. So I can see very quickly that I have 8 in here. Okay, and now in my next one I want 600 up to 1,000. So I'm going to start here and go up to 1,000, and I see that I have 11. Okay, so you can keep going through that and just count up how many go into each one. I'm going to go ahead and copy this from the book for the sake of time at this point. So I'm going to go 23, 38, 45, 32, 19, and 4. So if we add these up, we should have 180. So every single vehicle has been included, it's all accounted for. At this point, we can then create our relative frequency. So I can spell that right. So I'm going to have 8 divided by the total, 180, and I'm going to once again lock that 180 cell. I use F4 to do that, it puts those dollar signs around it, and I'm going to hit enter. So I can see that 4.44% of the vehicles had a profit of between the 200 and 600 mark. And I'm going to go ahead and drag that down. And once again, I'll do a double check, and I will add those up. And it gives me 1. So I know that I have done this part correctly. Now there's one other section towards the back, and I'll go ahead and go over this pretty fast. And that is the cumulative distribution. So we have the cumulative frequency. And the cumulative frequency just adds up as you go. So for instance, the first class, our frequency is 8. Okay, so it's going to be 8 in the first row for the first class. Now in the second one, it's going to be 8 plus 11. And I'm actually going to use the one above here. I'm going to go 8 plus 11. Okay, now my next one is going to be 19 plus 23. We're just adding up as we go down, and now my formula I should be able to drag. So everything is getting bigger as we go. And our very, very last cell in the last class should be how many vehicles we had total. So cumulative frequency, cumulative means to add up. We're just going to add up the frequencies as we move down. You can also have a cumulative relative frequency. And that's where you do the exact same thing, except you do it off of the relative frequency column. So we're going to take our 4%, and that's going to be what our first cell is, and then we're going to take the 4% and add it to what's in our second class, the 6.1%, and then I'm going to go ahead and drag that formula down, and we should end up with 1 or 100% of our vehicles there in the last one. This can be really handy because we can say 69% of our vehicles had a profit of 2,200 or less. That's what's really nice about the cumulative relative frequency piece. I think we're going to stop there for this video, and we will talk more in class.